Welcome to the podcast, A Year of Bach. My name is Evan Goldfein, and today I welcome guitarist and composer Miles Okazaki. Miles has been an important guitarist in the New York City jazz scene for over 20 years, and I've enjoyed listening to Miles on record and in concert. And his social feeds are fun. The content ranges anywhere from tips on guitar technique to dissecting solos by Charlie Parker or Charlie Christian. A few weeks ago on Substack, he posted a multi-layered overdubbed guitars playing a Bach fugue in A minor while tracking along with the score on video. And it was great, and here we are talking today. Miles may be best known for his epic solo guitar recording of the complete compositions of Thelonious Monk, another hero of mine. I recommend that album highly. Miles's compositions are rhythmically intricate and harmonically adventurous, and it's all interesting. His latest release is called Boomtown, came out a couple weeks ago, which features a sort of chamber jazz ensemble playing Americana-inspired compositions with complex harmony and jagged melodies. Today we'll be talking about Bach and composition, improvisation, Thelonious Monk, and more. Miles, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me, Evan. That was quite an intro.
So you started off on classical guitar. Where did Bach fit into that part of your playing?
I'll just preface this entire thing to say that I'm no classical guitarist or expert on Bach, for that matter.
You're talking to someone the same, we are fans.
But of course, like many musicians, Bach is just a lifelong sort of touchstone, And I had some easy pieces that I would play, like the bourrée and those other kind of things that most beginning guitar players play, and simplified versions of things like that, And eventually I started to learn, sort of just looking at piano music. I didn't really read that well, so I had to kind of pick things out and then just memorize them. But I eventually got to checking out some piano music, trying to play along with easy parts of the Well-Tempered Clavier and playing through some chorales very slowly and things like that. I started off with that, but it was certainly not any kind of legit version. And I still have my guitar. It's actually not in here, but my first guitar was this. It's called a Gibson CO Classical. It's like a student model classical with like an applied decal, rosette thing. And I still play that same guitar. I've had many classical guitars, but I always sell them and end up just back with this same one that I started on. It has big scalloped out, spots in the fretboard and stuff like that. But
it's funny how those early instruments stay with you. I have my high school guitar that is still very dear to me, even though I have much nicer instruments.
And for me, the sound of the nylon string and the feel of the nylon string is kind of like a comfort food thing for me. It's always just out. You can always pick up one of those and start playing around on it. And the other day, my son picked up the nylon that was hanging up on the wall, and he was like, messing around. And he's been messing around with it for a month, and he's kind of doing some stuff. I'm not saying anything, I'm not like, hey man, check out this or that, cause it's an easy instrument to just start messing around with. You can get a sound out of it. You don't plug it in,
The tone is so warm too, right? Yeah. Were there particular records or artists that inspired you back in those days?
I only had a couple of records. I had a Segovia record, I had a Julian Bream record, and I had a John Williams record. I remember, as far as classical guitar goes, I had those, and that was plenty. I mean, I listened to those, and then the other side of me was interested in, like, the Beatles, basically. I'm talking about when I was, like, 8, 9, 10 years old.
Yeah, I had the same experience. It was John Williams first, and then I thought that was the only way you can play things. The same thing with Glenn Gould. I thought that was the only way you were allowed to play those. And then my ears opened up. There was so much more to learn. So later you moved your focus more towards jazz, I guess, after the Beatles. And I think I can editorialize on your sound a bit. And I think you're a very rhythmically centered composer and improviser. It feels like rhythm comes first. And Bach is probably best known for the counterpoint and then rhythm and then maybe melody. I think he's an underrated melody writer, but here we are because he was just so strong in the other things. But rhythm and pace is so important to playing Bach well and appreciating what he's doing. How do you find that your playing is inspired by what Bach did, or even what inspired you to even start that video that you created on Substack a couple weeks ago?
Oh, well, let's see. Yeah, when you first look at some Bach as opposed to something like Stravinsky or something like that, you might say, well, there's not that much happening rhythmically. It's pretty much focused on these layers of things interacting with each other and all that. But the timing of things, I don't think about rhythm so much as like this is a specific rhythm, like this is 3 against 4, or this is a certain figure of 16th notes and all that stuff. I think about rhythm more in terms of where things are placed in time. So basically timing. And when you hear someone like Monk play, for example, who you mentioned, it's the timing of things that always attracted me. Monk is not playing a lot of stuff, but he's placing it very carefully in time so that it has the greatest effect. And so I was always struck by things like fugues, where you have these voices entering. Sometimes they enter in an unexpected place, and then as it goes, they start coming in all kinds of weird places. And you're like, oh, this one's overlapping that one. And so it's the timing of things that actually creates the harmony, right? I mean, we're not talking about somebody who was like, well, I need to go from the 5 of 5 to the 5 to the 6. He was not dealing with that type of theory. It was just melody, and then the timing of how those things interact with each other just creates this movement. So I guess that's the thing that is always and remains very mysterious to me about Bach. It's like, how do you make these decisions that are so effective and then inevitable in a way?
Definitely. And how do you think about that as a performer? If you're thinking about timing, where do the notes go? You have to be the person who's placing them as opposed to reading them out on a score or even transcribing what your own writing is.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't really know if I have an answer for that. I know when it's not working, and I know when it's working. It's just a feeling, I think, and it's sort of like a conversation. Many people compare improvisation with types of conversations you're having with people. And you know when that conversation is awkward, you're talking over each other, oh, you stop, and there's silence. You can't seem to get coordinated somehow verbally, you know, like you just keep interrupting. And then you'd have a conversation that's flowing. Oh, I have this idea, you have this idea. And so I guess when I'm in the process of improvising, I'm trying to not be self-conscious about what's happening, like in terms of the decisions I'm making. Like, you know how when somebody has something that they want to say and they're just waiting to say it, as opposed to listening to you and responding, they're just waiting for this thing. It could be a joke that they're trying to say, it could be some smart thing, you know, whatever. You don't want that, right? So you want to really be actually in the moment, and to me that involves just actually sort of removing myself from the situation a little bit, you know,
like
so
your
that
ego or like your front consciousness is
no,
like
a little like more literally, like I'm just listening, I'm not even playing, you know. And then I'd be like, well, if there were a guitar player playing right now, what would I like to hear, and when would I like to hear it, you know, that would sound the best sort of most natural way to do it, you know. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. It's very ephemeral, you know, because you're trying to take these lessons that you've learned from these great composers and then sort of do things spontaneously that somehow have some essence of those lessons. Although you can never get to the level of detail unless you're Charlie Parker or something. You can't get to that level of detail spontaneously that somebody could write it down and say, wow, look at this, and let's analyze it and all that. That's the highest level, you know.
When I think about this question again of timing and rhythm, and I think about my favorite Thelonious Monk records are his solo records. I just like to hear him with his compositions and even with the standards. And there's something about where he places the notes that's very pleasing and perfect and totally himself. And we've heard over the past 70 years people trying to imitate that style and missing. They just can't do it. What do you think about Monk's timing in particular that makes it work, that makes it jump off the page slightly differently than if we were just going to be reading the notes plainly?
Well, it's hard to say. If somebody tries to imitate Monk, it's not going to really work because it won't sound like them. It'll sound like somebody imitating. On Monk, the famous quote of his is that the genius is the one that sounds the most like themselves. So I guess the thing that makes it impactful is the sort of commitment behind it. Like Monk might play, I mean, a simple example would be like he has a rhythm changes song, go do 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 do, and he might take it and go and turn the beat around or something like that, and then turn it back around. And it's the intention, even though it's a very simple example, it's kind of like it's a version of, well, I did that on purpose, and that's just an expression of personality. And then somebody else is going to have a different expression. Their personalities manifest in a different way, you know. Monk's is a little tricksterish in that way. You know, somebody like Art Tatum or something, it might be this incredible flourish that's like, okay, here's a thing that actually nobody else on the planet can even do this thing. So that's a different type of personality.
And you tackled every single one of Monk's compositions, and you didn't really look to adjust any of the harmonies. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn here. It felt like you were playing more with the rhythm and stretching out where the chords were rather than messing with any of the harmonies themselves. Was that a conscious choice, or is that how you were able to put Miles on top of Monk in a way that sounds good?
Well, Yeah, I think if I play an old standard, if I'm playing like Someone to Watch Over Me or something, some old Gershwin tune or Cole Porter, I could be inclined to reharmonize it a little bit. But with Monk, these are kind of composed with a lot of these details in mind and specific voicings in mind. When you listen to him practicing, there's some recordings of Monk practicing, like there's one where he's playing I'm Getting Sentimental Over You, and it was like released somehow. But I think his wife was recording him in the kitchen, playing on the piano there for like an hour on this tune. Just do boom, 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 bee, boom, 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 and just trying out different things until he arrived at something. There's also a version of that that's more compositional where he's working on Round Midnight. You're like, well, obviously he put a lot of thought into these choices that he made. Even when he's covering tunes, even if he's playing Dinah or something, he's putting a lot of thought into that, how that's harmonized and how that's expressed. But if you're playing like Crepuscule with Nelly or one of these very sort of through composed tunes with very, very specific voicings, I think it's just makes sense to try to get those as much as it makes sense to play. You don't sit down with the Well-Tempered Clavier and be like, well, I think I'll just kind of do whatever, like sort of my version of that, although, in the tradition of jazz and stuff, you do put your spin on it, right? So the idea is, I guess, it's a different problem for guitar than it would be for piano. Because if you were doing piano and you're just like, I'm just going to learn everything Monk played, you might end up sounding like you're imitating Monk, right? Which could be a problem, But it will never sound like that on guitar because it's guitar. So that's already one filter that passed all the music through. So you pass it through this filter that eliminates a lot of things that are not possible. And so in those spots, then that's where I have to figure stuff out.
And I think that's one of the successes of your record, in that the harmonies are all there, and it's through this much more limited framework. You have 6 notes at a time, and not even that really. So it's a real success. It reminds me a little bit of when you were talking about that filter. I read an interview with Brad Meldau recently where he's talking about how he's trying to play guitaristically on the piano when he's thinking about the 60s and 70s songs that he loved so much. Like, how can you get that E minor chord strummed on an acoustic guitar to sound something of the same sort when he's on a keyboard? And that really opened up my mind to how he approaches those tunes.
He's a big fan of guitar music, which is kind of fun to hear pianists try. I mean, because it's just so much of it goes the other way of guitar players trying to figure out how to do piano stuff. But there's things that are amazing about the guitar. It's like this: I can play this fast tremolo. That's very hard to do on piano. It's very easy on guitar. So some of the things are like really, really brutally difficult, and some of them are just, some things on piano that aren't that hard are just on guitar. They're just like, oh man, this is like really, really hard. And then sometimes it goes the other way too.
Yeah. You shared with me that you have a special affinity for a particular Bach piece, which is the C major solo violin sonata, BWV 1005. What about that one is important to you? I mean, one thing that I've heard about is that comes in sequence after the famous Chaconne from 1004, which is just like, it's like death at the end. And then 1005 comes in with this almost heartbeat that's coming back. Da, dee, da. And so what's meaningful to you about that one? What resonates?
Boy, I'm trying to remember when I first encountered that piece. I think I might have been like a senior in high school, somewhere around that period of time, or junior in high school. I started going back into Bach, like after I'd been doing a whole bunch of jazz for a number of years. And I was like, well, let me see if I can get like a little higher level on that stuff than those beginning kind of modified pieces for, junior guitar players. And I got a copy of the violin sonatas, partitas. And I guess I had heard the Chaconne from Segovia or something like that, and I was like, well, there must be more of those and stuff. Like, that's one thing, but it's just one movement or whatever. And so I just started doing those to try to also learn how to read a little better, because I was a pretty poor reader, and then I started memorizing them, because I was just used to memorizing. After I read it a little while, I'm like, okay, it's still easier for me to memorize stuff than to read it. Now this is my first year in college. I remember, because I went to the library and I got the recording of Heifetz playing those. I listened to that a lot, and I was like, I can't even believe that this is hundreds of years old. I just fell in love with those pieces, pretty much all of them. The E major one, of course, is great on guitar, and the Chaconne is extremely famous. The G minor is super fun. I had a recording of Julian Bream doing some of that one. But then for me, the C major was like, I was like, I want to find one of these that I can just sort of use as, I want to just try to memorize one of them, you know? And I was like, which one do I really love all 4 movements of? And that was the one, you know, because it starts off with that.
Yes.
And that thing is like, that could be written in any time period, you know. It's just sort of elemental, you know, and it's a heartbeat thing, and that's something I was attracted to rhythmically, you know. The original,
The C major helps on guitar also, right?
Yeah, it's C major, and it's the original rhythm. You know, and all the violin music works well on guitar. You just play it an octave down. You don't go below the G, I guess, but, you know, but it generally works out. So that one, you know, and then, you know, then I would play, that goes into the fugue, right? And that's, I think it's the longest fugue written for any instrument. You know, I mean, it's incredibly long. It's like, I mean, for me to play, it takes like 12 minutes or something like that, you know. And I mean, Heifetz plays it faster than that, I think, but I would play it pretty slow, you know. And to get that one memorized took me a long time. And then, because it goes, I mean, it's just unbelievable. It's crazy because it has the theme comes in, and the minor theme, and it's inverted, and then it has these other passages in between the fugal parts that are these long single note sort of episodes. I don't even, it seems like it's just limitless abilities to spin this theme out that's so simple for this incredible amount of time. So I was like, wow, this is one I could really study for a long time. And then there's the Largo, and then there's the Presto. So I would do the first two with the fingers, and then the second two with the pick. Try to do fingers first, kind of just basic finger stuff on that first one, and then the second one is very complex finger stuff, counterpoint. And then where you have to try to make a middle voice pop out and stuff like that on a fugue is like,
Sure.
it's like interesting problem. And then the Largo's very nice practice for legato playing and with the pick. And then the Presto is just a perpetual motion just workout. So I was like, this is a perfect piece for me. So I did memorize that one, and I never played it in public, but I memorized it and practiced it a lot, and then I forgot about it. And then 5 years later, it came back, and that's one I come back to a lot. And I'm like, okay, let me kind of try to get this up and running again. I did an experiment. I was watching the Glenn Gould, what is it, the 82 version of the Goldberg Variations, 81, somewhere around there.
81, I think.
And he's talking about these relationships between all the tempos, or tempi or whatever, where like, oh, this one's like a triplet in relation to that. He had this all worked out. Like when he does that interview, he does those kind of like fake interviews
With himself,
where he already has the answers or whatever. But anyway, he talks about that, and I was like, oh, that sounds kind of like how I play that piece. So I just did one with a click. I did the whole thing with a click on 40, and everyone has a certain different relationship to that click,
Yeah.
So it kind of works. I wouldn't say it's totally successful, but it was a curiosity. It kind of works. Some of the stuff is a little slow, and some of it's like really too fast. But
So do you prefer your Bach playing when you're listening to it to be a little bit more on grid, or do you like it a little bit more legato?
I mean, I still to this day have never performed any Bach live, So it's just really purely for my own pleasure and like to kind of work on stuff. So I do, and I don't follow like any kind of performance, like correctness or anything like that. So one thing I'll like to do, for example, is just record a chorale and then just improvise on it. So I'll record it like on a little looping pedal here, and I'll just improvise through, just listen to it and kind of figure out how it works and where the harmonies are going and stuff like that, and then just treat it like a little tune.
What brought you to that A minor fugue that you posted a couple weeks ago?
where, what was it that brought me to that? Talking with a friend of mine, Matt Mitchell, who's a incredible Bach player. He also doesn't perform it, but I mean, he's like, yeah, I'm almost done working my way through the second book, the Well-Tempered Clavier here, and now I'm doing some Shostakovich, and like he plays all this stuff, like crazy, like, I mean, it's crazy. But anyway, we were talking about, I was trying to remember, isn't there one fugue where Bach uses all 12 tones, in the melody, in the theme? I couldn't remember really, but then I started just looking through it, and I found that one. I was like, I think this is the one. And I started kind of looking at it, and I was like, let me record it, I think I am, yeah. And then I was like, well, let me just record this because it's pretty awesome. So I just did that. Like, you can't, on the guitar, you can't play those fugues on the guitar with all at the same time. You have to overdub. Yeah, but I have a 7-string guitar I got just for doing this kind of thing that goes down to a B, so I can grab those lower notes that are on the keyboard, and that pretty much covers it. I mean, there's very little of the Well-Tempered Clavier that goes below that range because I think the keyboard was a little smaller than modern piano, right? So again, I'm no scholar on this stuff, but yeah, then I went through and analyzed that piece, and then there's another podcast, WTF Bach, and he yeah, and which I listened to a lot. I was just listening to yesterday. He was talking about this Passacaglia piece that was like ridiculous, but that I hadn't heard before. Anyway, he picked that up and took it much further with the analysis and all that than I could.
Yeah, he gets real deep.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'd love to hear a Bach record of yours if you are ever to come out with it. But first, we'll have to hear the the A minor that you came up with. What have you been listening to lately? That's great. Bach or otherwise, new or old. What's continuing to inspire you now?
Oh boy, that's a good question. It's funny. I was just visiting my dad, who's getting a little elderly now, and we were just going through all the old records. When I was a youngster and I was learning stuff, he would make these tapes for me. He had a huge jazz collection, so I'd be like, well, I'm trying to learn this song Body and Soul. And he's like, okay. So he would make me a tape that had like 15 versions of Body and Soul on it. Because that's the best way to learn jazz standards is just listen to different recordings. And then you kind of like, you kind of make some compilation in your mind of all these things, And so we were sitting around just listening to Nat King Cole and listening to Ella Fitzgerald and listening to Jimmy Scott and Julie London.
Coleman Hawkins is the famous one, right?
Oh yeah, that's Body and Soul, yeah. But in this case, we're just listening to the old singers. I love listening to old singers singing standards and Frank Sinatra and stuff like that. And so besides that, I mean, well, that guy I was talking about, Matt Mitchell, he gave me this for my birthday, Xenakis box set.
Oh wow!
Working my way through
That's
this
heavy.
electroacoustic works. Yeah, that's on the other side of things. And then I listen quite a bit to just things that my friends are doing, So I have like a lot of CDs from them and stuff. People like Dan Weiss and Kim Cass and Patty Brennan and like a lot of these people in the sort of New York area improvised music scene,
Yeah.
And with Bach, I'm trying to think if I've been listening to, well, the last thing I heard was on that podcast. And then, yeah, I just keep going back to the same stuff that I have like, 5 or 6 different versions of the violin sonatas that I listen to. And I keep going back to those. But yeah, that's about all I can think of.
I find it so rich to keep coming back to the records that I loved. And as I've listened to more versions over the years, I can hear things that I might like less than the ones that I learned originally, or things that really still resonate with me with the original ones. Mm-hmm. These things, they grow along with you as you change as well, as we all get older and have more context to relate these things to.
Yeah, it's like that with everything, with books and movies. I was really a consumer of very heavy stuff when I was like, 21, and I thought I was really understanding a lot, and I would be reading Dostoevsky and watching Tarkovsky movies and stuff. And I guess it's a little different when I watch them now, when I have quite a different place in life. And he's like, oh, okay, now I get it,
And then you'll come back again in 20 years, and then it's different again.
And Monk's music is certainly like that for me. Every time, it could be any particular day, I'll sit down and I'll be like, I wasn't doing that right. That thing, I missed something there,
Just based on how he was performing those pieces.
Yeah, like I'll be playing a song, I'll be like, I feel like that spot, I'm always not sure what to do. Let me go check. You
Oh,
know, like,
okay.
and then I check a few different ways, and it's like, oh, it might be the same way. But if it's the exact same way on several different recordings, I'm like, okay, that's specifically supposed to be that thing, and I was just doing what I thought it should be, as opposed to what it is.
I think
You
they
know,
came out with a definitive book. I think Steve Cardenas worked on that. Like, it's like the
Cardenas and
Bible now.
Sickler did this book, Thelonious Monk Fake Book, and they used a lot of very good sources. So I did use that as a reference, especially for the earlier songs. There's a bunch of earlier songs recorded on Blue Note Records in the late 40s and stuff where it's kind of a larger group and it's pretty messy and hard to hear everything. 'Cause his music back then was also much more sort of ornate and
Right.
bebop sounding, you know. So those are good references for that. Other tunes, they have to choose which one they're going to use for a reference and stuff. But that was yeah, they did a lot of good work on that one, because I was trying to do something like that just for myself when I was a teenager, to try, like, how many songs, how come nobody, you know, has made a book, or there's no list or anything like that. There was no internet, of course. So I was just like, well, let me just try to get as many Monk records as I can, and I'll just make my own list and try to learn them. And at that point, I might have had a list of like 40 tunes or something like that, you know, of which maybe half of them I could play, you know.
It's interesting how he became less ornate over time. Some of the later tunes are pretty spare. They're just even like basic blues based with his own spin on them.
I think he found ways to distill that message into fewer words. I think that's a skill you try to get, especially as your chops get weaker. Like, well, I don't need to say everything all the time. I can just kind of, you know,
Right.
I can hint at it.
It does remind me of my favorite Thelonious Monk quote when people would come to him, they're like, how do you play this? And he'd say, play your own shit.
Yeah. Yeah, really. I mean, it's, you know, how do you want to sound more like me? Well, just try to sound more like you. You know?
That's right. Yeah. If you're not going to sound like you, who's going to sound like you? Yeah.
Yeah, you'll definitely be the best at sounding like you.
That's right.
If you can actually figure that out, what that means.
That's a lifetime.
So,
Yeah. Well, Miles, thank you for taking the time today to talk about Bach and Monk and composition. And the new record is called Boomtown, and it's a worthy listen. And of course, listen to that Thelonious Monk record. I will link to the Bach stuff in here, so our Bach listeners will enjoy that. But really appreciate you coming around.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. This is a blast. Just anytime. I love to talk about this kind of thing.
Cool, man. Thanks.
All right. Later.